Hello, I'm Jim Demman with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you very much for meeting with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Shawn, what do you believe were some of the major accomplishments for Clark County in this last year?
Probably the two that immediately come to mind is the passage of the 179th Street development area, and then some of the changes through the budget process. Particularly, we just went through the 2020 budget adoption process, and we're able to address some fundamental issues within that budget. So those are probably two of the biggest issues that immediately come to mind, and ones that we'll continue to be focusing on.
What about some of the biggest challenges?
Sure. Ironically enough, really, two of the biggest challenges are 179th Street and the budget process. They're both opportunities and challenges at the same time. The 179th Street is a very, very large development, going to be, I believe, very beneficial in the long run for Clark County. Coming up with the financing method in order to do those transportation infrastructure improvements was a long process, but I think in the end we came up with a plan which is able to allow us to continue to go forward with that development. And then when I started initially, very quickly I had the 2019 supplemental budget, so I wasn't able to really get into that as much. The 2019 adopt was more of just trying to make sure we provide the basic services. Really, the 2020 budget I've been able to address some of these fundamental critical areas. So both of them, ironically enough, are opportunities, challenges at the same time. So.
Okay, well, let's get in a little bit more into depth on some other some issues facing. First, you mentioned the budget.
Sure.
You called it a fiscally conservative budget. So how were you able to meet the needs of the increasing needs of population growth with limited revenue growth?
Sure, it's an ongoing challenge for almost all of your local county governments and city governments and local jurisdictions. Clark County is a place that many people want to live in. Historically, we've had a large amount of residential development. Residential development tends to take more in terms of services and doesn't generate as much, obviously, sales taxes generated through residential development. So that's an ongoing challenge. The advantage that we have is because Clark County is so attractive and we've grown so much that we're finally starting to see more commercial development in areas throughout this area. So that's a huge component of it. At the same time is really trying to address some of the fundamental budgetary issues that Clark County has been facing for a while. And at least in two of those areas, we've been able to really change the budget and try to address them to put them on a longer sustainable path for the long term.
So over 5-10 years, you think you're much stable?
Well, the longer term, if we don't undertake some of these steps right now, I'm more concerned longer term, because that's why I believe it's so important for us to address this right now as much as we can in terms of and what I'm speaking about here is the general fund, which for those who don't know, the general fund is the largest fund that the county has. It amounts to roughly $170 million on an annual basis. And it's the most, if you will, flexible fund that you can have the most uses. We have literally over 100 other funds altogether. But the general fund is the largest and the one which gives you the most flexibility. It's also the one that's faced the most challenges. So I think it's important that we try to address some of those challenges in the general fund right now so that we put it on a longer term path to stability. You don't really fundamentally change something that developed over a long time overnight through one budget process. It requires ongoing systematic approaches to it, and I think that this budget, while not being perfect or addressing all the issues, is able to address several of those areas.
Okay. You talked about the 179th Street area. Let's talk a little bit more about the anticipated development impacts to the county.
Sure.
What do you see?
It's going to be a very significant impact in many areas. And it's not just the urban holding area. It's important to remember that the actual urban holding is more of a U-shaped band in that area, but this is going to have literally a regional impact on the Discovery Corridor and everything. So we're looking at anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 additional jobs according to the Hovey study. Literally, it'll be thousands of new homes, enormous opportunities for businesses also at the same time, because obviously this is right astride of a major interstate highway, so you've got very high traffic counts, so we're very hopeful for even greater additional commercial development in the longer run. So there's much like I was mentioning before, there's costs and there's opportunities. The opportunities are having that longer term development. having the sales tax revenue being generated, providing for some additional housing. I know that there has been concerns that there isn't as much affordable housing in this area, but I think it's also important that we provide housing generally, because the price of housing, as somebody who came from the Midwest, I can attest to, is obviously a huge obstacle for anyone. We want to continue to focus on affordable housing, but we need to focus on housing just in general, making sure that we provide that housing that's available to all those people that are wanting to move to Clark County, and we continue to see that as we come up close to 500,000 in population.
Now, you talked about paying for roads, transportation, but as well as other infrastructure, schools, for example, things like that. So talking about infrastructure for transportation, you mentioned, how were you able to secure that funding?
Sure. And it was a combination of many different areas. We were able to do it without any kind of tax increases in order to be able to fund it. We work closely with the development community. They're paying higher TIF rates and or a surcharge. That is going to fund a portion of the improvements. We're utilizing REAP money. We're anticipating utilizing grant money. A small amount of the road fund, which has already been set aside for projects in that area. So it's a large combination of funding. Now, the recent vote in regards to the car tabs is a little disconcerting. Obviously, that's still in flux. About $50 million of the improvements are for the actual improvements on I-5, which are going to be critical in order to be able to ensure that traffic access. So we're watching that very closely. We want to see how this comes out. And that's probably my biggest concern right now. That doesn't mean that we want to continue to address all the other funding areas and make sure that we have adequate funding in them. But that for right now is really the focus right now, is making sure that that money for the I-5, the $50 million worth of improvements of I-5 continue to be available.
Okay. Now, it seems to be we have, not you and I, but there's been talk about a new jail. Yes. Or an improved jail for many years. Where are we with plans for updating the county jail?
We're actually, so in the budget that was just approved, there is $700,000 which is set aside for planning and coming up with ideas for the new jail. So we've done a number of studies in the past in regards to the jail, but this is, while it's going to be primarily focused on the jail, I don't want to focus on just the jail in a vacuum. So we also need to look at the family law annex. We need to look at all the county-owned property down there and try to come up with a plan in the longer term, because as we continue to grow, much as we've been talking about, there's going to be that additional demand for services. The council just added money for an additional judge. We're running very low on courtrooms. So again, we can't focus on just the jail. We need to focus and looking at all of our space utilization, because when you're looking at the time frame to build new buildings, for example, it's many years before the family law annex lease expires, but just going through the permitting process, the construction, when you're in an economy where there's so much demand for construction, a couple years is a very short time in order to get new buildings. So that money that's in the budget, we've been drafting an RFP. I'm hoping to get more input review on that and then have that issued right after the first of the year, so that we can then select somebody to go through and present options. Because I think it's very important. This is one of the things we did on 179th Street, is present an option menu, if you will, and say, this is how much, this is one option. It would involve, renovation to the jail. This is one option. It would involve, building a new jail here. These are the costs that attendant for that. Because what's going to have to happen is we want to present that. We want to then get the council to buy off on it, and then it's going to have to be something that the voters can support. So I want to. I think that there's no doubt that we need a new jail. It simply is an absolute requirement. I want to do it as in fiscally a responsible way with a minimal impact to the taxpayers, but there will be a significant cost with it almost no matter what we do. Anytime you're talking about building an entirely new jail or essentially completely renovating and adding on to an existing one.
Okay. 2019 started off with a measles outbreak that made many people sick and really strained the resources of the county health department. what steps have been taken by the county since the outbreak to minimize potential impacts in 2020? And already we've had our first measles.
Yes, first edition one, and hopefully that's going to be the only one. We won't see a further breakout of that. A couple things that have been done, probably the biggest one, and I realize this is very controversial with some people, but the change in the legislation in Olympia to essentially tighten up the requirements for immunization in the schools. I realize that there's many people that have strong feelings about this, but immunization is critical for this, and getting a larger amount of immunizations. I have no doubt that immunizations are safe, and I would encourage everyone to immunize their children. So that's probably one of the most important things. There's also been focus on, foundational public health. Several of our counselors went up to testify in Olympia for that legislation. We're able to get some additional money. Again, we don't know what the potential impacts could be with the car tab vote or anything else, because we don't know exactly what approach the legislature will take in regards to how they want to address that potential revenue shortfall. Even though it's not directly related to the car tabs, it could have impact in other areas of the budget if the legislature decides to pull money from public health or from any other place. So we were able to recoup most of our costs, not 100% of our costs. And honestly, I think that it was really, it's a very unfortunate situation, these measles, but it was a bargain in many ways for the state, because Clark County, we had such an effective response, and so we were able to keep it from spreading even further. So I'm very proud of the work that Clark County did in this, and I think that hopefully we won't be facing this again with any additional outbreaks, but again, I would encourage people to get their children immunized. It's critically important.
It's hard to believe, but we're entering the 5th year of the county charter in 2020. What's the councilor's decision to move from a weekly public hearing to 2 hearings a month part of this transition?
No, the council decided to go to the 2 meetings. It gives more opportunity for people to appear since the meetings are in the evening. Prior to that, we were having meetings during the day, so the council decided to move it to essentially a bi-monthly meeting in the evening. There are some cases on election day and otherwise where we can't, because the space is needed when we have day meetings. But the biggest reason was just to give people more of an opportunity to participate, and that's really the fundamental reason for that.
Okay. Now, will the Charter Review Commission members be selected by voters in 2020? I think they're called the freeholders.
Yes, there's. So it's 5 years after the certification of the adoption of the charter, which occurred after the November election. So that's the reason why the election will be in November of 2020 for the Charter Review Committee. It's 5 years after the adoption of the certified results of the election. So there will be 15 members of that, and that race will be in November of 2020, and they will take a look at making recommendations as far as what should happen with any kind of revision to the charter or modification to it.
Okay. We've kind of talked about challenges and opportunities facing county government. Is there anything else you'd like to tell viewers about county government?
Sure. Clark County is going through a lot of changes. I mean, Clark County continues to grow. One of the things that we're going to be focused on in the upcoming year is really taking a look at their community development department. I think that it's important that we get as smooth of a permit and inspection process as we can. We continue to see large amounts of growth in Clark County, so we want to make it as conducive for the development community as possible. So that's going to be one of the big areas of focus in the next year. We're anticipating quite a bit of changes and improvements there. But there's been a lot of change overall in Clark County government. Myself coming into Clark County, there's been a lot of personnel change. You lose a lot of institutional knowledge, but you also get people that have a different perspective and a willingness to take different approaches. So in some ways it's bad that you lose the institutional knowledge. In some ways it's good because you gain some different perspectives and willingness to try different ways. I think that that's going to continue, albeit hopefully at a slower pace, because the last year has been very, very, very busy. As somebody who's worked in county government for a long time, I can say that this has been probably the busiest period I've ever experienced in county government. But it's been good because we've been able to enact some changes and see some improvements. We still got a number of areas we need to focus on, and that's what we'll be doing for the next year.
Well, thank you very much for meeting with us, and have a great next year.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.